we had mice in our break room, and I knew those mice were going to come and eat me alive. So I was about to freak out. It's not funny, Cindy. So about the time I'm going to freak out, this young lady from Goodwill starts to scream. So that kind of, I guess, pulled me back into center. I went to try to help her. I told her to speak up so I could find her because I couldn't see her. It was so dark in the room, I couldn't even see my hand this close in front of my face. If I breathed in stuff, and I had no idea at the time what it was. It ended up being all the stuff from the ceiling that fell through. It was ceiling tiles on top of me. As we moved toward the door, there were ceiling tiles in the hall, pieces of wood, pieces of granite. So I got a hold of her, and we started to go toward the front part of the building so I could go tell my office. I thought maybe an air conditioner unit had fallen through the ceiling. I thought maybe something else had hit. And then my very last thought was, surely this is not a bomb. And I don't even know where that came from. When I heard the boom and I was sitting at the table, I felt my whole body just kind of wave like that, which is kind of freaky. When we were heading toward the front of the building, we heard some men's voices, and so the young lady with me started hollering for them. And they told us just to stay where we are, they'd come and get us. And so they did, and it ended up being Don Rogers, who was the building manager at the time, and the district court clerk. They had been in the elevator lobby when the bombing happened. And so I looked at Don and I said, what in the world has happened? He said, I don't know, but we need to exit the building. So I started to go toward the front. He said, you can't go that way. So I'm not going back that way. There is no that way. He said, well, you can't get out this end at all, so we got to go. So we turned around and I said, well, what about the babies in the daycare? He said, we got to get outside. So we walked out the front of the building at the corner of 5th and Harvey and turned and looked at the building, and we were, both of us, just stunned. We could still see debris falling in the air. We could smell the smoke. We could see the truck on fire. We could see the cars in the parking lot by the survivor tree on fire. And it was just the most horrendous thing I'd ever encountered in my life at that point. We kind of just stood there a minute, and I looked at Don, and I remember asking him again, what about the babies? And he shook his head. GSA managed the daycare to the point of federal space. It was run by a daycare provider, but we were responsible for making sure that facility was clean and run properly. My grandson, Tyler, went to that daycare until December of 1994, when we took him out because they weren't doing him right with his asthma. We had a change in daycare providers, which angered a lot of the parents who took their kids to that daycare. So they started to pull their children out. Just before the bombing, we got a new daycare provider. We did a major clean of it. We were redoing and resetting the whole thing. And so the children were slowly starting to come back where it would have been a lot worse. As Mrs. Branco said, 19 children died that day, some of them babies. I knew those babies. Joanne knew those babies. We would go up and play with those babies. When Tyler was in that daycare, I went up there and played with him, so I got to know the other babies. These were my babies. These were GSA's babies. We all knew them. We all loved them. We all cared for them. So it was very devastating when that happened and those babies all lost their lives. Some of them lived, but I think the majority of them died. By this time, we could start hearing the sirens of the fire trucks and the police trucks coming. As we're standing on the corner, we saw probably one of the biggest men I've ever seen, police officer. And I told him about the daycare, and he turned around and he said, where? And I showed him. I said, second floor. Approximately 25 children, maybe 30. So he gets on the radio, and then he turns and goes into the front of the building. So I followed him. I went back inside because I saw my coworker, Joanne, who was was my supervisor at the time, and I thought, what better way to get a good rating than to go and try to save your boss. So that's not what I thought. So I went inside, I helped her get out, and I went back in to try to help another man. And this officer turned to me and said, ma'am, you've got to move. You've got to leave. You're standing on top of somebody. And I looked, and I saw nobody. All I saw was rubble, concrete blocks, granite blocks, ceiling tiles. But apparently he had seen a hand. So I turned, I went back out front, and there was another coworker there. And she was walking around with no shoes on. So she was getting a lot of glass in her feet. I checked on whoever was there in that immediate vicinity, if I could, see who they were. I tried to find out where my coworkers were, and decided to go to the south side of the building and see what I could find on that side. As I would go, I would stop and check on people who were out on the streets. I would see if I could assist anybody. There was planters on the plaza side of south side of the building, and I saw a lot of people climbing up on there. One of them was a coworker, so there was a big old man came up and put part of fence up there so we could use it as a ladder because they're fairly high planters. I got up there to try to help, and I looked up, and there was a man staring me in the face with a look that said to me, are you just going to stand there, or are you going to come and help? And so I'm trying to make up my mind what to do, and my coworker, the building mechanic, was there, and he said, don't worry, he's already gone. Later found out that he had been found by a police officer, and they set him upright, but that he was already dead. They just forgot to close his eyes. His legs had been cut off. So from there I got down, and as I did that, I ran into a woman I recognized whose child was in the daycare. And she also worked in the building. She was coming around trying to get into the south side, and I said, you can't go in, that was totally blocked with concrete. So she asked what could she do. So I asked her what her baby's name was. She said it was Blake Kennedy. And I knew Blake. We knew Blake. He was in Tyler's class. And so I asked her if she prayed, and she said yes. And so we stopped and prayed for God to save her baby and help her to find him quickly. Right after that, an FBI agent walked up and told us that we had to leave, that they had found another bomb. So I told him what happened with this lady. I said, her baby's in the daycare, you need to take her and help her. So he took her, and I turned around and saw a lot more people in the building coming out. The first responders in our event were the other federal employees in the building. We were doing everything we could as people came out to identify them, to direct them to a specific area if it was for their agency, to try to get some organization, and then to try to get back inside that building to help them. When I started to go back toward the north side of the building, I noticed two ladies laying on the street that were not there the last time I was there, and so I went up. One of them was our 20-year-old student aide, and the other one was our federal building fund clerk. And so I knelt down with both of them, asked them, who can I call for you? And I don't know why, because I didn't have anything to write with or to call with, but it was just one of the questions that came out of my mouth. The little student aide started complaining about her hip and her leg hurting. Her hip was out of socket. Her leg hurt because the knee bone had popped out. And so without alarming her, tried to calm her down and said, okay, you just need to be still. There'll be someone here in just a second. So I kept talking to her while I was talking to the other coworker who had a laceration on her head. I helped unload the student clerk onto a board, and the paramedics carried her to the south side. Then I helped carry the other one to the south side on another board. I got to the corner of 4th and Harvey, where they had all the ambulances coming to pick people up and take them to the hospitals. A nurse had come up, and our federal building fund clerk was laying there, and she asked me if I would hold this bandage on her. He had to hold her scalp. Her scalp had been cut back, and so I was holding it in place. Of course, blood was running everywhere. She was holding her stomach and complaining of it hurting really badly. She then asked about the babies in the daycare, and I had to tell her I don't know at this time, but it doesn't look good. As they would bring people out of the building, I would go up to see if I could identify them, to see if I could maybe help their family find them faster. That if someone knew who they were, then they weren't just a person on a board or in an ambulance, they were a name. The majority of what I saw was really not very identifiable as an individual. A lot of damage to body parts and faces and babies, and so I kind of think I was operating just on adrenaline at this point. And I stopped for a minute to breathe. I hadn't been breathing, I don't think. And I looked up and I saw my husband standing in the street, and I thought, what is he doing here? He's supposed to be at work. Well, apparently they'd heard about it on the news, and he decided to come and find me, so he found me. Gave me the biggest hug I've ever received. I thought he was going to break my ribs, and he said, the babies. And I said, I know, the babies. And so we stood there a minute. He wanted me to go home, and I said, no, I'm not leaving until I know where all my coworkers are. And so he pretty much just followed me around the rest of the morning and the day. I introduced him to the coworkers that were around me, and as we were standing there trying to make a plan as to what to do next, they yelled for us to run, and I would not run. Everyone else was running past me, but I was not leaving until I knew where my coworkers were, and I didn't know where they all were. Finally, they grabbed me by the arm and dragged me away. We started to work on our way north, which is where we had understood that we had a kind of a center set up for us all. I encountered another young man who worked in our office, and he had us one of the radios for our mechanics. So we worked and I kept in touch with the mechanics through that way to know where to go, who was where. So we worked our way up north, and everyone was there, so I got on the radio and asked again. Well, by this point in time, all the mechanics were at the spot. Worked our way back west and ran into a couple of coworkers at a med site that was set up, and from there went a little bit further north and ended up at a funeral home. To this day, I cannot find where that funeral home is. I don't know. So we sat there, caught our breath, and then I decided it's probably time someone should call the regional office for work. And if you know what had happened. Couldn't remember any of the phone numbers that we called every day. Every day in our job we talked with the regional office. Couldn't remember one. Finally remembered the phone number to one of my best friends when I used to work down there. I called her. And got to where I couldn't talk, so Kathy Brady, the property manager that was with me, took over and she made the call there. After she was through, my husband said, we should call the kids and let them know that you're okay. I hadn't thought of anyone in my family at all to this point. I was on the gotta determine kind of mode of, help identify people. Finally got a hold of my parents. I thought maybe that's where my kids would be. My oldest sister answered, and when they realized it was me, they started screaming and hollering, and my daddy told me to get out of there and to get home, and I told him as soon as I could I would. So I asked about my children, and they weren't there, which really kind of, now it pisses me off, and it kind of confused me, but, so we went back outside to wait for the people from Fort Worth. We were told they were on their way. Sat there for a while, and then I told Chris that I wanted to go to the hospitals to see who was where. St. Anthony, which is right by the site, had on their walls pieces of paper of every person that had been brought there and where they were dispatched to. So we went there. I found out a couple had been treated and released there, and a couple of them, were at this hospital, a couple were at this hospital. So I told my husband that I wanted to go to the other hospital, but he said he was too sick and he needed to go home. So we lived about 20 miles away, and neither one of us said a word all the way. We get within about a mile of our house, and I remember putting my head on my husband's lap, and I just cried. And then I quit before we got to the house because I didn't want my children to see me that way. When we got into the house, all my kids were there, my grandson was there. I remember grabbing him and holding him and loving him just as hard as I could. My husband had a fever, a very high fever, so I put him to bed. Shortly after that, my parents and the rest of my family arrived, and the pain on my daddy and mama's face really, really hurt my heart. They were scared to death. All I could think about, though, was getting to the other hospitals. So I told them I had to clean up and I had to leave. And so I washed my face. My sister Sue took me downtown to the hospitals, wherever I needed to go. First I called Joanne and asked her, where do we go tomorrow? Where do we go to work? Because we didn't have an office anymore. She directed me, if we wanted to report to a hotel downtown that they'd set up for us to have as our offices. So my first hospital visit was to Richard Williams, who was the gentleman I was standing on. He was having his ears sewn back on, so I didn't have to go in and see him, but I talked with his wife. Here's where we are, here's the deal, that updated her on all the information. Went up to the next floor, there was Tom Hall. He was the other gentleman I'd gone in to try to hail. He was so destroyed that had his wife not been with me, I would not have recognized who he was. So again, updated her on everything, who to contact for what type of information. Then I left that hospital into another hospital. There was a coworker there. He was so severe that his family was only allowed to see him once every 2 hours, and so I didn't want to take their time. So I told them, call me, this is what you need. Got from there, tried to get back downtown to the hotel, but we couldn't find out how to